The reason that bullion banks go short in New York and long in London is not because they all understand that they have to do this in order to keep the monetary system alive. It's not that, even though it is that, they don't see it that way. They're operating in a homunculus, little ants running around their tunnels. They don't see the entire structure of it. They're just trying to profit on a spread. So if it becomes now, they can't go long in London and short in New York, and they already got all the gold over, and the only way they can profit now is going long in New York and short in New York. That doesn't give them any spread, so they're not going to do it. And so then what's going to happen is they're not going to sell contracts short, and the trading volume in New York is going to plummet, and then what happens is and
without the shorts,
price swings in New York, they get a lot more volatile because there's a lot less market makers doing anything. Could it technically be both? I mean, look, Silicon Valley Bank had all these deposits, these huge amounts of deposits in premier accounts, like billions of dollars in checking, and those were lost, and then the Fed had to bail them out so that depositors could get their money back, and there was a delay in this. I mean, if those deposits weren't being lent out, and why were they gone? If they weren't being lent out, you would expect, okay, Silicon Valley Bank goes under. Therefore, all of the other clients that it sold derivatives to or whatever business it was doing, those go under, or those lose their investments in the bank. But the depositors get their money back if they weren't lending out the deposits. I mean, you could also take it like this. Like, okay, so if they lend money into existence, or they lend credit, because money is credit. I'm using the terms interchangeably. I know the difference between money and credit. Okay, if they lend credit into existence, that credit is dollars, and whoever they lend it to can go to the ATM and pull out cash, where that credit is now corporeal in the form of banknotes. So, I mean, if credit is credit and what we trade around is credit in whatever form, banknotes or otherwise, then there's going to be no practical difference to, either lending out deposits or creating credit out of thin air. It would lead to the same thing because everything is fungible. So either way, you're going to lose the deposit, whether it was lent out directly or whether it came into your account from somebody who borrowed it from a bank and then paid you. Either way, there's going to be a domino that leads this stuff to lose its existence in some way.
At the heart of the issue lies the mysterious nature of money itself. Banks don't just lend existing funds, they generate new credit, which becomes spendable money in the economy. But this credit must eventually be reconciled with real cash reserves from the Federal Reserve. The problem is when panic strikes, depositors expect tangible dollars, not accounting entries. This creates what feels like phantom money, where promises outpace reality. Even economists debate whether deposits are actually loaned out or if they're simply replaced by fresh credit. Either way, once confidence collapses, depositors risk losing everything unless the Fed intervenes.
I mean, what would theoretically happen? It's funny because this should be basic stuff. This should be something that everyone understands. It should be like the ABCs of the financial system, and still it always feels, no matter how educated you are, no matter how much you understand about money, it feels like we're just chasing phantoms. If, let's say, theoretically, Silicon Valley Bank loans $100 million to some other guy, and then that guy's credited $100 million, and therefore somebody in their bank has $100 million in a deposit account, and they take that cash out, then his credit would have to go to number would have to go to zero, whereas the credit was loaned out to another bank, so they are short because they got to take those notes from somewhere. They got to borrow it from the Federal Reserve. The notes ultimately come from the Federal Reserve. They actually get the money printed from the Treasury, and then they have it, and then they give it to a member bank. But now, let's say Silicon Valley Bank has a debit or has some kind of obligation to the Fed to repay that $100 million, but the deposits were already loaned out to some other bank. So,
despite centuries of financial theory, banking remains confusing, even to insiders. The Austrian economist Murray Rothbard once argued that most bankers don't truly understand their own system. Credit creation, cash withdrawals, and Federal Reserve backstops form a web of promises so complex that even well-trained professionals struggle to map it out. This opacity is intentional. It allows the system to function without constant scrutiny. But when the machine stutters, ordinary people discover that their supposedly liquid deposits are entangled in a fragile network of obligations. In effect, we're all chasing financial ghosts we can never fully grasp.
They're going to be in trouble, and the other bank has no responsibility to give them back those deposits, so the Fed ultimately has to bail them out. And
but why do they loan deposits to another bank? Why don't they just generate more credit to loan to the other bank? Can they not do that?
Even if they do generate more credit from the other bank, right? Let's say they do and they don't loan out the deposits. If they just generate the credit, then the other bank has that money, or has those dollars in its bank account, and they would still have to purchase any cash notes from the Federal Reserve to replenish this guy's deposit account. And they don't have those notes. But if they don't pull them out, then it shouldn't matter. See, that's what this is the phantom chasing again. It's like, how do you figure this out? Who really understands it? And if the Austrians got it wrong, especially if Murray Rothbard got it wrong, when he's specifically saying in his work, The Mystery of Banking, that even bankers don't understand what the hell is going on here, then, who really understands it? Who understands what the hell's going on? Is it some, 5 or 6 guys in, some inner room in the Pentagon or in Congress that Elon Musk just finds out he exists there, and he got like this old beard, like the guy guarding the Holy Grail in the 3rd Indiana Jones movie, and he can't move, and whatever is going on, the fact that it's so difficult to corporeally understand in the most basic sense shows you that this whole thing is just a bunch of phantom chasing, and when the phantoms run out, there's not even a ghost in the machine just stops floating. If we're on the gold standard, then the honesty will recorporealize, will I don't know, materialize. The honesty will materialize out of necessity.
The financial system's dependence on centralized authority mirrors another controversial industry, pharmaceuticals. Just as banks rely on the Fed, drug companies lean on the FDA. In both cases, regulators are deeply entangled with the industries they oversee. Executives often rotate between corporations and agencies, blurring the line between oversight and collusion. This centralization breeds inefficiency and mistrust. Critics argue that genuine safety and transparency can only emerge in a decentralized environment where competition and accountability rule. In banking, that could mean competing currencies or gold-backed notes. In medicine, it might mean market-driven reviews replacing state-approved monopolies.
If we take this a step down in the pyramid and talk about something that is actually very physical and corporeal, you could take the pharmaceutical industry. Right now, their business model is the Federal Reserve of the pharmaceutical industry is the FDA. Right? And the FDA is controlled by people that are controlled ultimately by the pharmaceutical industry. It's their own circle jerk of immoral, disgusting poison. Right? And they have all these tricks to make you believe that they're actually checking safety when they're not, including, testing, placebo-controlled testing that isn't placebo-controlled, only pretends to be, that kind of stuff. And all these others, that's just one of them. But so if we take that example, where the business model is keeping the FDA approving your drugs through some kind of trickery where they get paid through the back door, they're evolving, whatever. And it's obvious. It's so like they end up the CEO or someone high executive in a pharma company ends up on the recommendation committee of the FDA or on the FDA board or whatever it is to recommend a drug and get paid. Like it's just so clear. And it's the same thing with the Fed and the banks. So in a world where there is no Federal Reserve, money would have to be honest, with different banknotes with different, I don't know, you could say stripes on them. This banknote comes from that bank. This banknote comes from that bank. They're basically all dollars, so they all have George Washington on them or whatever. Even if they don't, it doesn't matter. But they would circulate with different discounts to gold based on how much credit those banknotes have, and whether they're digital or physical doesn't even make a difference.
The debate over honest money often leads back to gold. Under a true gold standard, banks would issue notes redeemable in physical metal, limiting reckless credit creation. Recent years have also shown gold's geopolitical importance. For example, in 2025, increased tariffs and trade barriers forced bullion banks to shift gold from London to New York to meet delivery demands. These movements revealed how tightly global finance is tied to physical reserves. When credit systems wobble, gold becomes the anchor, a material check against abstract promises, ensuring that wealth remains something more than numbers on a screen.
Right? Because ultimately, anyone would have the right to go to any bank and say, "Give me gold for this amount of dollars," if that's what you're saying. These credit notes are. So in the pharmaceutical industry, any company would be able to try to disprove that any medication is safe or effective, and there'd be no FDA to give a stamp on it, and then they could issue their own consumer reports that would be very disparate or very spread out, and then the consumer reports on, is this drug safe and effective, they'd be published in different magazines which would compete with each other, and then people would have to decide which Consumer Reports drugs magazine is the most honest, trustworthy. And then the best ones would ultimately win. They get the most subscribers, they have the most, doctor recommended, blah blah blah. And then you'd ultimately find out by the market which drugs are safe and effective, rather than relying on 10 or 20 people that are controlled by the pharmaceutical industry because they get paid backdoor from the same goddamn company.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, we have a problem of centralization. Ultimately, the solution is not RFK's. RFK can only do what he can do, but
Yeah.
RFK's solution of let's get the FDA honest again is not going to work long term. It might improve something very ephemerally for a few months or maybe a few years, like slight improvement, but immediately when he gets replaced, it's going to go bad again. So it's not make the Fed better, it's not make the FDA better, it's get rid of the goddamn things.
Ultimately, the question is whether centralization can survive growing distrust. History shows that tinkering with regulators, whether the Fed or the FDA, only buys temporary stability. Long-term reform may require dismantling these monopolies altogether. A decentralized banking system, backed by gold or competing digital currencies, could enforce honesty through competition. But change won't come easily. The current system is entrenched, profitable, and defended by powerful interests. Still, as crises like Silicon Valley Bank remind us, the facade can only last so long. When phantom money disappears, society must choose: continue chasing illusions or rebuild finance on something real.
Don't necessarily have to be covered with from delivery through the LBMA. It depends on the positioning of the banks that do this. If they're short in New York and long hedging in London, then and somebody calls for delivery and their long hedge is in London, then yeah, it would have to go from London to New York.
Yeah.
But if they're long and short both in New York, then the gold wouldn't have to move at all. It would just move from one contract to another within the COMEX system, which is, I think, why there was so much delivery into New York in 2025, because Trump came to power and he said he was going to tariff everything. So then all the bullion banks were like, okay, and all the longs in New York just held to delivery so that the gold could come in from London, which is what happened. And then they wouldn't have to go between New York and London anymore. They could just do it within the New York system. And the question is, why didn't they just do that all along? What's the advantage of going short in New York and long in London, absent tariffs, other than just going long in New York and short in New York, and then just trading around warrants? The reason that bullion banks go short in New York and long in London is not because they all understand that they have to do this in order to keep the monetary system alive. It's not that, even though that it is that, they don't see it that way. They're operating in a homunculus, little ants running around their tunnels. They don't see the entire structure of it. They're just trying to profit on a spread. So if it becomes now, they can't go long in London and short in New York, and they already got all the gold over, and the only way they can profit now is going long in New York and short in New York. That doesn't give them any spread. So they're not going to do it. And so then what's going to happen is they're not going to sell contracts short, and the trading volume in New York is going to plummet. And then what happens is
And without the shorts,
price swings in New York, they get a lot more volatile because there's a lot less market makers doing anything.